Hello, everyone. My name is Abigail Abarbanel, and I've been a psychotherapist for 26 years. Welcome to my 8th podcast in the series, Taking the Mystery Out of Therapy. The topic of today's podcast is personality disorders. The reason I'd like to talk about this topic is because it's so important for individual psychology, for relationships, and for us as societies. I've had extensive experience working with people who've been affected by people with personality disorders. I've studied the topic for almost my entire career. I would say that about almost a half of my clients have been people who've been affected by personality disorders. And I've also studied personality disorders when I was trained as a relationship therapist. My teachers always believed that if relationship therapists do not identify a possible personality disorder in a partner, in a relationship, they can do a great deal of harm. So we were taught about this, and we were supported to try and identify a personality disorder in a couple, in a person, one or two people in a couple, as soon as possible, ideally, even in the first session. So I have a lot of experience and I have a lot to say, and this is a huge and complex topic. So I'll do my best to focus on the points that I think are really important. I want you to remember that whatever I talk about today does not qualify you as a viewer, as a listener, to become a diagnostician and suddenly diagnose personality disorders. But my aim is to help you, to help the listeners, the viewers, to understand what it is and to be able to identify what might be going on when they see certain patterns, certain situations, or they are themselves subjected to something. I don't work with people with personality disorders, and later, as I explain what they are, I think it'll become obvious why. I do work with people who've been affected with people with personality disorders, but who don't themselves have it. The research on personality disorder is actually quite disturbing. There is quite a lot of research, but it tends to be focused on the people with the disorder. Remember that scientific research is driven a lot by the policy of funding, by the politics behind funding, rather than what is necessarily good or useful to people. So for whatever reason, I suspect it's something to do with the way that personality disorders are judged, that the research tends to be more about how to help them or to understand them and what's happening to them, to those who have a personality disorder, rather than help the people who are affected by them. The impact of people with personality disorders on other people is absolutely devastating. The fact that there is no research about it, or hardly any, leaves sufferers usually on their own, which is why I have a support group for women who've been affected by somebody with a personality disorder. It's a situation. If you're affected by somebody with a personality disorder in any context, it can leave you extremely isolated, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. People just don't get it sometimes, and it's hard to get sympathy or support. This podcast is intended to be supportive of the people who've been affected by somebody with a personality disorder. The only avenue people right now have is the self-help literature. There is a lot of useful stuff written out there, and this podcast hopefully will add to what's out there to offer support to people. When I studied the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, we were warned. Let me show you just the front cover of it. Those of you who don't know what the DSM is, it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It was developed by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's the main diagnostic tool for psychiatrists and psychologists in the West of what they call mental disorders, so disturbance in human psychology. When we studied it, our teachers were very clear that we were going to find ourselves in everything. So once we started to look at all the different disorders, so-called, we were going to think that we have all of them. So that might happen to you as you hear about personality disorders. You might think you have it. But one thing you need to know is that if you worry about having a personality disorder, it's very likely that you don't. If somebody actually has a personality disorder and you tell them that, it doesn't actually mean much to them. And that's because of problems that I'll talk about later, and that's the difficulty or impairment in self-awareness and the impairment in the ability to recognize the impact that they have on others. They actually don't care about it, and that's not because they don't want to care, but they just can't care. So a diagnosis of personality disorder really means very little to the person who actually has it, but can be absolutely crucial and incredibly helpful to the people around them. There is a general discomfort with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, with the DSM, and it's quite justified. And that's because the DSM treats psychological problems like medical problems. And that means that they look at clusters of symptoms and then they give them a title. Some of the diagnostics in some of the diagnoses in the DSM-5 are quite useless, to be honest with you. Something like, for example, generalized anxiety disorder doesn't actually help at all. But the diagnosis of personality disorders is actually helpful, but as I said, not so much to the person, but to the people around them. The diagnostic manual isn't a book that offers reasons or explanations for conditions or treatment. It's a diagnostic manual. That means it simply looks at a cluster of symptoms and gives them a label. How they handle depends on people's philosophy. So whatever approach there is to dealing with psychological difficulties, that would determine what treatment people have. So if you are coming from the medical model, then you would try to apply medication, for example. Also, an important thing to understand about not just personality disorders, but pretty much everything that's in the DSM is that one behavior or one trait is not a sign of a personality disorder or any condition. All conditions that the DSM lists, including personality disorders, represent consistent and recurring patterns that are persistent across situations. So that means somebody is having a bad day and has been a bit awful and said something awful to their partner, but it's a kind of a one-off. Does not mean there is a personality disorder. A couple is having a bit of a difficult time for a little while, but otherwise the relationship is good and supportive and equal. There is no personality disorder there. So one thing doesn't mean a personality disorder. Diagnosis depends on identifying a cluster of symptoms that are persistent. It's usually out of a list. And in the personality disorders like borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorders, typically you choose 5 out of 9 symptoms. And if a person has 5, then they're probably diagnosable. I will use the term BPD for borderline personality disorder, NPD for narcissistic personality disorder, and psychopathy or sociopathy for antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is, I think, the least impressive of all the personality disorder diagnostic in the DSM, because it tends to focus on criminology. And the problem with antisocial personality disorder is that they don't all commit crimes. They don't all end up in prison. They don't all end up killing people or raping people. But they're nonetheless present and incredibly harmful in many situations that I will cover a bit later. So I think the diagnostic criteria is missing something in antisocial personality disorder, but I will try to set some of the records straight. There is a myth that everyone with a personality disorder, especially BPD, has suffered abuse as a child. So I'd like to tell you that that is a myth. It's actually not true. I've worked with many, many, many parents of children who have personality disorder, adult children, and there is absolutely no question that there's never been abuse in that family. I know the situations very, very closely, but the parents will report to you that that one child, let's say out of 2 or 3 or 4, was quite different from the moment they were born. They were more demanding. There was something a bit different about them. They demanded all of the parents' attention compared with the siblings. And the siblings often suffer a great deal from having a sibling, a brother or sister with a personality disorder, which can have an impact later in life as well. And I will discuss that when I get to the next to the topic of the impact of personality disorders in relationships, in personal relationships. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I follow the research on personality disorders very, very closely. There is a confirmation now from studies that are coming through that, yes, there is something different in the brains of personality disorders, and also that there is a genetic component. We're getting more and more information about that. So as far as I'm concerned, I would, if I had my way, I would classify personality disorders as a form of neurodiversity because the brain is different. The problem we've had is that the attitude to personality disorder tended to have a moral judgment or kind of a value judgment about it. And that confuses the issue a great deal. People with personality disorders have a different brain, which I will explain in a minute how. They don't choose to be the way they are. They don't want to be the way they are. They just are the way they are. For example, somebody born with autism does not choose to be autistic and does not choose to have the traits that they have. They just are. And we've learned to understand it, and we've learned to help people with autism understand that they have autism, accommodate them better. I mean, we still have a long way to go. I keep hearing stories of how people with autism, even with diagnosis, are so misunderstood and mistreated, but we're making some progress. The point is they don't choose to be the way they are. People with personality disorders are the same, but the difference between autism and personality disorders is that autism is not particularly harmful to others. In fact, autistic people can be unbelievably good. They tend to be very moral, very good people who try to do the right thing, whereas people with personality disorder can be quite dangerous. And in some circles, even in psychiatric circles, they've sometimes been described as the closest thing to evil that you can describe, that you can see. The book by Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, called The Science of Evil, describes the big three, the big three disorders that he focuses on, which is borderline personality disorder, narcissistic, and antisocial personality disorders. He talks about them as the three disorders where empathy is completely absent, and he defines evil as the absence, the permanent absence of empathy. So this is you don't have to accept that, but that's his position, and it is quite plausible. His team, he and his team actually studied the brains of people with personality disorders, and they mapped out. They have mapped out the empathy circuitry, and they realized that it was impaired in people with personality disorder. So the permanent absence of empathy is likely to point to a personality disorder, but we'll get to it in a minute. So I'd like it to be to be considered a form of neurodiversity, but without naivety, without thinking, oh, because somebody is neurodiverse, therefore they're harmless. They're not harmless, and they're dangerous, which is why I'm talking about it in this podcast. Another thing I want to say is that a person might have more than one diagnosis. Just because somebody's autistic, for example, doesn't mean they don't have a personality disorder on top of that. Or just because somebody has a personality disorder doesn't mean they're not also autistic. So people tend to go, oh, the person has this or has that. But it's possible for people to have more than one diagnosis. It depends on how their brain is. But as with everything in my podcast, as with everything with the approach to mental health that I am covering in these podcasts, everything has to do actually with our brain structure. Our brain structure regulates, and connectivity regulates our psychology as it regulates everything in our bodies and everything about us. Therefore, everything that goes wrong is also to do with the brain. So what are personality disorders? So there are about 11 personality disorders listed in the DSM. And the most useful ones to know about are the big three that I mentioned, which is borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder, BPD, NPD, and sociopathy or psychopathy. Nobody knows how many people I'm always asked that, how many people have that? Nobody knows. So the research varies. Researchers always say, well, we don't know. We think about 10% or 14% or this percent or that. But because we don't know how many people are not diagnosed. Only the number that are diagnosed are known, but we don't know how many walk around in the population without a diagnosis. We don't actually know. My guesstimate from reading all the studies that I've been reading and my experience, I'm guesstimating that about 20% of people are born with a personality disorder, and or they have a genetic predisposition to it and will develop, which is likely to cause them to develop a personality disorder. You can't catch it. It's not infectious. You can be born to a parent with a personality disorder, but not develop one yourself. It all depends on how your brain developed. There is a very clear genetic component in personality disorders, and it's now becoming obvious in the research as well. So it is quite possible that no matter what environment a child grows up in, they would still develop a personality disorder if they have the genetic predisposition for it. You might remember in a previous podcast that I mentioned that all of us could lose our prefrontal functions, our executive functions, if our limbic brain takes over. So I showed you this slide from a study that's called The Effects of Stress Exposure on Prefrontal Cortex, and it's trying to show, the illustrations show that the limbic brain, when it takes over, when it's triggered, will weaken or shut down the prefrontal cortex. So that means, of course, that we lose all the incredible higher level capacities that the prefrontal cortex tends to give us. We lose our empathy, we lose our capacity to understand the impact we have on other people and care about it. We lose the ability to plan ahead. We lose the ability to think clearly. We can't regulate emotions. We can't regulate behavior. But for most of us, as soon as the brain goes back to a relaxed state, so the limbic brain is relaxed again, we will regain those functions, which means that most people flip-flop between the brains, but they're generally healthy. What we're doing in therapy, as I explained previously, is we integrate these two systems so that this flip-flopping can't happen anymore. The prefrontal cortex can no longer be shut down by the limbic system, even when it's triggered into a great deal of perhaps distress or anger or fear. Imagine, though, that this shutdown is permanent, as in you never get it back. So people with personality disorder demonstrate traits that show that the prefrontal cortex is just impaired. It's not working. It's like they're permanently in a state where the limbic brain is in charge of everything that they do. So that means that they don't regulate their emotions or behavior very well. They can't, or at all. They can't experience empathy. They don't understand the impact they have on others. They don't know how to care. They don't have the capacity to care about the impact on other people. So let me try to refer back to my notes. I want to be clear about what I'm saying. The self-awareness that we have, that our prefrontal cortex gives us, makes us capable, for example, of learning from experience. So when we become aware that we have done something wrong or we've said something wrong to somebody else, we can then go and make amends. We also worry naturally about the impact we have on others, and not for selfish reasons, not because I'm scared that they will punish me, but because we know that we have a moral imperative in the prefrontal cortex that makes us understand when we act morally or immorally. So, and we can't lie to ourselves very well when our prefrontal cortex is fully functional. So when we get back our self-regulation, we get back our empathy, we can make amends with somebody else, we can apologize, we can make other type of amends if necessary. But it also makes us possible to learn from our experience so that we don't repeat it. So in healthy relationships, you might have a difficulty of some kind. People can be triggered into their respective stuff and they end up fighting or arguing. But once they get back their executive functioning, and they're able to see each other's point of view, they can sort things out. So in a healthy relationship, things get sorted out. People talk about things. Sometimes it can take a while. That's why we have therapy for couples, but people can sort stuff out. And often what will happen is relationships will deepen, they will learn from their mistakes, they will get closer, and they will continue to feel safe and loving towards one another. But imagine that you're in a relationship with somebody who can never, ever, ever do that. So when you're in a relationship, when a person's in a relationship with somebody with a personality disorder, nothing can be sorted out. If you try to confront somebody with a personality disorder to tell them that they've harmed you or that they hurt you or that you're not happy with something they did, they're likely to accuse you, to fight, to throw it back at you, to then attack you, or they might collapse into complete kind of breakdown and distress. But either way, the reaction will make it all about them. They can't see you. They can't see the impact that they've had on you. All they see is that something is being done to them. If you tell them that they've hurt you, they now think that you've hurt them. It's very common for people with borderline personality disorder to accuse other people of abusing them simply because the other person says, I don't like the way you spoke to me, or that's not okay for you to do what you do. They then scream abuse. So what happens in personality disorder, because the prefrontal cortex is not functional, it's impaired, it probably hasn't developed properly. The person with the personality disorder is the only one in the relationship. It's the only person. So there's no two. There's no sharing of space. There's no sharing of resources. There's no sharing of psychological resources. Everything is about them. They can't actually help it. Remember, they're totally limbic. It's as if their emotional age, or it's as if they're stuck between the ages of 2 and 5 years old, when we're very small and we are the center of the universe to ourselves, and everybody else is a resource to us. So somebody with a personality disorder, or somebody who's never developed into human maturity, because that never developed. And now when they're in a relationship as adults, other people to them are only a resource, a supplier for what they need. And that will be true whether they're partners or friends or parents or children. So people with personality disorders use their children. They can't help it. They end up using their children. The children are the ones whose needs should regulate the relationship, but instead it's the parents' need that regulate the relationship. So children learn from a very young age that their needs don't matter, and that they are there to provide something for the parent. It can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be an act of absolute neglect, or it can be more subtle. Some people with personality disorders can feed the children and dress them and make sure they go to school and clean their rooms and all of that, but they might demand that they take care of them emotionally. So the child, in effect, is discouraged from developing properly, because the moment that a child or anyone shows the person with the personality disorder that they are a person in their own right, they become a threat to the person with the personality disorder. Somebody who has a sense of self, somebody who has boundaries, is a problem for somebody with a personality disorder, because they can't just take what they need. They're not, the other person is not just a supplier. The difference between the big three, the borderline, narcissist, and psychopathy, is mainly in the type of supply, we call it, that they need. So think of them as predators, as human predators. They lack the ability to be in a safe and mutually respectful relationship with somebody else. That basically exists to exist. So just like a predator in nature, they have a particular prey that they would need. So depending on the animal in nature, they would have different preferences for food. Think of it this way. The food for people with personality disorders isn't necessarily, it's not physical food, it is psychological food. So personality disorders, borderline personality disorder, the supply that they require is called fusion. The person with a borderline personality disorder cannot be in the world on their own. Think of a 2 to 5-year-old being in the world alone is complete and utter panic. A child cannot survive in the world alone. So a person with borderline personality disorder actually experience the same kind of distress when they are on their own. And on their own doesn't mean that they're actually physically alone. It means they can't fuse. They can't be a kind of a part of somebody else. A child between the age of 2 and 5 doesn't have an independent sense of self. It's something that's just emerging. So they need to feel that they are kind of fused with their caregivers. That's what gives them the confidence and the security that their needs will be met. But imagine an adult doing that. That is an absolute disaster. Adults need to be whole adults in relationship, and each then they can be very well connected, but they each need to be a person in their own right in order for the relationship to be well and for them to be well. But with a borderline personality disorder, the other partner is not allowed to be themselves. They can't be themselves. Any sign, any indication that they have their own preferences, their own activities, maybe their own friends, the person with the borderline is going to be really triggered and is going to feel betrayed. And they will then either collapse, they might threaten suicide, they might become sick suddenly and terribly depressed and can't function, demanding all the attention, or they can become extremely aggressive and abusive and try to punish the person, that their partner, to try and get them back. It's extremely dangerous. There is no way that anybody can be in a close relationship with somebody with a borderline personality disorder and actually be well psychologically, no matter how integrated they are. The narcissist, somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, and I think we're all getting a crash course in that by watching Donald Trump's shenanigans that are in the media, unfortunately, all the time. Narcissistic personality disorder requires constant admiration. So the borderline wants fusion, the narcissist needs constant admiration. If they're not constantly told how wonderful they are and how amazing they are and how beautiful or how smart or how successful or how wonderful overall, depending on what they value, each narcissist values different things. So they need to hear it all the time. If they don't hear it, they begin to get distressed. And they will also typically respond either by collapsing and becoming distressed, and then they are the center of attention in that way, or they will attack. And we see Donald Trump attacking people all the time, like journalists, for example, who don't flatter him enough. We saw what he did to Zelensky, and the only thing he did, why he did that to Zelensky in that moment when he did it in the meeting that they had, is because Zelensky didn't understand that he needed to flatter him all the time. If you flatter him, you're likely to get something you want. So flattery or admiration, excessive need for admiration, is the cornerstone of narcissistic personality disorder, and psychopathy or sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder. Their focus, what they need, is complete control over someone. So, or preferably more than one. The food is the control. The supply is the control. It's not the context. It's the control itself. So some psychopaths will become con people who steal people's money, but it's actually not even about the money, it's about the control. A lot of psychopaths are the ones who are responsible for domestic abuse, for coercive control. They are controlling their partner, and there are different degrees to that. It depends on what they can get away with. And also there are variations. They're not all the same. So not all psychopaths rape people and dismember them and eat them. We've had cases like that, but they're pretty rare. Most psychopaths don't necessarily murder people, but they can. A really good film on psychopathy is the wonderful Mr. Ripley, I think it's called. It's Matt Damon. It's one of the most chilling and really accurate profiles of somebody with an antisocial personality disorder, basically a sociopath or a psychopath. All the big three, lack empathy. They don't care about the impact they have on other people, and they cannot change. They cannot reflect. They cannot change. They don't only have a damaged impairment to the prefrontal cortex, they seem to also have really poor neuroplasticity. We can't help them. So that means that talking therapy cannot suddenly build a part of the brain that isn't working. By the way, I forgot to mention in sociopathy, the limbic brain is also impaired, which means that sociopaths are also unique in the sense that they do not produce normal emotions in the response to normal situations. Remember, I explained to you that emotions are generated in the limbic system in response to the world around us and to what happens to us, which enables us then to survive our environment and to make judgments about how to be in it and all of that. Imagine people who don't even generate emotions. So that's psychopathy and sociopathy. Borderline as a narcissist have emotions. All of them have everything. All of them are exploitative, all of them are controlling, all of them are narcissistic and self-centered, all of them lack empathy. But what you look at to differentiate between them is what is the thing that they need? What is the thing that they covet the most? What is their prey? I wanted to talk about the impact of personality disorders on other people, and I've already mentioned the impact of personality disorders in relationships. To be with somebody who is incapable of empathy, incapable of seeing you and your needs, or their children, who can never learn from their experience and can never change, that is devastating. We all need to have this kind of give and take in relationship. We need to be able to see each other. We need to be able to be there for each other sometimes and to care about each other equally. There is no equality in relationship with somebody with a personality disorder. It's only one person in the relationship. The impact on children is obviously devastating, and I've already hinted at that. The parent with a personality disorder cannot actually allow their child to become properly mature. Children will have to really, really, really fight to grow up. Typically in borderline personality disorder, the children grow up with trauma, and a lot of them have slow development. They will be feeling at age 45 or 50 like they're still 15. They can't grow up because the parent won't allow them, and people are so confused that they don't know what's happening. They don't know why it's like that. They think there's something wrong with them, and the reason they think it's something wrong with them is because those parents tell them there's something wrong with them. They blame the child for anything that goes wrong. In a sense, people with personality disorders always blame other people for everything that goes wrong. And the reason for that, it's not because they choose to, it's because they are unable to reflect. They have no self-awareness, and they don't perceive themselves as somebody who does something in the environment. They don't have that. So they actually don't have a sense of self at all. It's quite tragic if you think about it, but the interest that I have is how devastating their impact is on other people, and the fact that we can't help them. Therapy can help people develop connectivity in the brain, but it can't generate brain parts that aren't already developed. So I am I'm now able to do an assessment in the first session to determine whether, for example, somebody has trauma or a personality disorder. And what I'm looking for is evidence of empathy and evidence of neuroplasticity. Empathy is interesting because I can sometimes get somebody who's very, very traumatized, who had a horrible, horrible childhood, horrible life, and they feel absolutely, messy and terrible and chaotic. But even in the midst of their narrative, the way that they talk about their suffering and they describe what's happening to them, they will put in bits of narrative which will make it clear that they're worried about their impact on other people. And I look for that. So I look for this is empathy. I look for that. I look um, for somebody to say things like, I'm really worried about how I'm impacting on my children. People with personality disorders never say that. They just don't. They don't. It never even occurs to them. So it's quite clear in the first session whether I'm dealing with somebody with a personality disorder or I'm dealing with somebody, for example, with trauma, who can actually demonstrate traits of all the three big three. My website is also written in such a way as to basically deter people with personality disorders. Because I have a huge section about what I don't do, I make it very clear that I have very, very strict boundaries around my practice, which will put off anybody with a personality straight away, with a personality disorder straight away. They'll know that they can't come to see me because I have strict boundaries, and they don't like boundaries. They want, if somebody with personality disorder comes to therapy, they typically reenact the same patterns that they reenact with everybody, with the therapist, and they might think therapists are kind of soft touch and will be a supplier, a regular supplier. I think the way I construct my website makes it absolutely clear that I'm not. I was a bit naive in the beginning, 26 years ago when I started, but I've learned very, very quickly about that. So boundaries are a really good way to deter people with personality disorders. The impact of personality disorders in the workplace is another thing I wanted to mention, and that is often visible in things like workplace bullying or chaos in the workplace. So you have a team or an organization who has a function to fulfill, that has a purpose for being there. But if there's somebody with a personality disorder in the midst, they will cause chaos. They cannot, people with personality disorders don't cooperate very well in group. That's also been established in research, but it's also evident from lived experience. They don't do teamwork. They can't, because they are the center of attention. So when they come into a team, and they can interview very well, because successful predators are the ones who sell themselves really, really well and can fool other people. They know how to mimic. They know how to. They study people, and they know what's required, and can put up. They can put up an act, but it won't last long. As soon as they're in a group and they're required to function and to be a part of a team fulfilling a purpose, they will be triggered because they're not the center of attention. So they will cause chaos in some shape or form. Often it's very common in organizations that instead of the organization doing what it's meant to do, it spends 80% of its time investigating complaints instigated by the person with the personality disorder, who are just trying to be the center of attention. All cases, I believe, of workplace bullying are instigated by somebody with a personality disorder. A real bullying. Sometimes a person with the personality disorder falsely claims to be bullied, just like the borderline will accuse their partner of abusing them. People in the workplace who have personality disorders would sometimes accuse others of bullying them, when in fact there is no substance to it. I have been involved in cases like that more than once over 26 years in 2 countries. It's very obvious. But in cases of real bullying, where somebody is targeted by somebody and there is an orchestrated campaign against them, it's very likely that somebody with a personality disorder is behind it. Why they target this person? If they're borderline, they don't like their boundaries. If they're narcissists, they don't like the fact that that person might be popular or might have a position of power over them. And it's not uncommon for somebody with a personality disorder to accuse their own boss of bullying them, and basically people's whole career can be thrown into tatters, and their mental health will plummet. And I've worked with many cases like that, both in Australia and here in Scotland. The difficulty in the workplace also is because the person with the personality disorder can be very good at showing one persona to one person and another to their target, to their bully, to the victim. And so there's a lot of people who will feel sorry for them, and they will think they're right, and they will seem very, very convincing. But and so that's what ends up happening, is that there's a whole gang of people that revolves around the person with a personality disorder that ends up ganging up against somebody. This is horrible and devastating. In general, there is what I call a toxic collection of feelings that people are going to feel in relationship with somebody with a personality disorder. Those feelings involve fear, anger, pity, repulsion, and confusion. Fear, because they are scary. Anyone whose prefrontal cortex is not working, who is unable to regulate themselves, is potentially a threat, because they can flare off, they can fly off the handle at any moment. They're unpredictable. It's impossible to plan anything around them because they will change their mind at the drop of a hat. So you don't know where you stand. You don't know what's going to come out of their mouth and whether the next thing they're going to tell you is going to be horrible. So fear is completely normal. Anger, also normal. If you're violated, if you're being used or manipulated or abused, of course, you're going to feel anger. Pity, because you will see occasionally the poor little kid in there who's basically just a bunch of basically limbic brain, who's just completely helpless and hopeless and is alone in the world and it doesn't know what they're doing. So of course you're going to feel pity, because anyone capable of empathy cannot help but feel something like that towards somebody who is not a full human being. Repulsion. Repulsion is a very common feeling, and in relationship with somebody with personality disorder, because repulsion is what makes us stay away from danger. If I feel disgusted or repulsed by somebody, it helps me stay away from it. So from whatever it is that I'm feeling repulsion, imagine that you walk down the street and there's a pile of vomit or poo on the ground. You're going to feel disgusted. Disgust keeps you away from it to make sure you're not contaminated. We feel repulsion in the same way also towards people who we might instinctively feel could be harmful to us. And confusion is an incredibly problematic and common emotion that people feel when they encounter somebody with a personality disorder, whether in personal life or whether in the workplace or in any other setting. The reason for confusion is because they are confusing. One minute they're this way, the next minute they're another. It's one of the reasons, for example, that people with borderline personality disorder are often misdiagnosed as bipolar. They have mood swings that go up and down depending on whether they are feeling abandoned or whether they're fused with somebody, or they have a little bit of relief because they feel fusion. So these ups and downs are often misdiagnosed. And I also think there's a political reason for this misdiagnosis, which is that psychiatrists are a bit reluctant to give women, particularly women, a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder because of the bad rap it had. And I didn't mention it in the start, but yes, there can be misdiagnosis. But as a practitioner, I don't take the risk. Psychiatrists are mostly good professionals who know their job. So if a psychiatrist diagnoses somebody with a personality disorder, I usually take it as a given and I don't take risks, even if it's a mistake. So that's when I exclude people with personality disorders from my practice, I recognize that I might be excluding people who are misdiagnosed, but I can't take that risk. The impact of personality disorders on society is massive and devastating. I don't think it's a secret to anybody that we are surrounded with narcissists in positions of power and with psychopaths in positions of power. People with narcissistic personality disorder, who I call successful, are people who achieved a particular high-level position, which provides them with the status they want, the admiration they covet. Psychopaths in positions of power are the ones who, once they're in power, they cannot control other people. So I'm not saying that everybody in position of power, or everybody who is famous and successful is disordered, but you can watch out for that. Somebody who is healthy and in position of power, their organization they manage, the people they manage are going to be well. The organization will be focused on what it's supposed to do. People will generally be satisfied in their work, in their functioning, and will be well. But where you see problems in mental health in organizations, where you see chaos, where you see vindictiveness, when you see divide and rule, you're probably dealing with somebody with a personality disorder at the top. And in organization, also in families, the person at the top, the people at the top set the mood, there's not the mood, the atmosphere or the culture for the entire organization beneath them. The problem I have with the impact of people with personality disorder on society is not actually so much them. You can't stop a predator from being what they are. Like I said, you can't blame a person for the kind of brain they have, but I can blame the people who put them in power. Now, why we put people with personality disorders in power, I don't know. Nobody knows exactly why we do that, but we keep doing this throughout history. We keep repeating over and over again the same mistake. We put the wrong people in charge, and look what the world looks like. It's a mess. It's acrimonial. It's full of wars. It's full of greed. It's full of competition. This is the world created by these people with personality disorder in their image, and they impose that image on everybody else. In order to avoid that, each one of us, all of society, or most of us, need to be so well developed that we don't fall for it. People who interview people for jobs need to be careful how they interview. Anybody can act a role in an interview and then end up getting a role and then having a devastating influence on other people. Every time there's a case of bullying in the workplace or chaos in society, or things don't work out properly the way they're supposed to, I suspect there's somebody in a key position that has a personality disorder. You will see that they are not able to own up. They're not able to acknowledge that they've done something wrong. They will typically try to hide what they do, especially all personality disorders, but psychopaths in particular. They'll go to great lengths to hide what they do. I forgot to mention that pedophilia is driven by people with personality disorders. Just having an urge or having an attraction, a sexual attraction, I don't know why anybody would, but let's say that there is this possibility that people will be sexually attracted to a child. If they have a prefrontal cortex in charge, they will not act on it because it will tell them straight away that that's going to harm the child, and the child is not a piece of meat to be used. But somebody who's a psychopath doesn't have that. And the act of sexual abuse is in fact an act of control. And as feminists have known for a long time, rape is not about sex, it's about control. So is child abuse. It's actually about control. It's not about just sexual gratification. Because if it's about sexual gratification and the person isn't disordered, they will not do what they do. This is the thing that stops us. This is the part of us that stops us from being harmful to one another and makes us safe for one another and makes it possible for us to create a safe world that isn't the way that we see it now, full of war and competition and greed and suffering that's completely unnecessary. So I think we have problems in the world because we have people with personality disorders in charge and a lot of frightened people who put them in power. Maybe I'll do another podcast about why that might be the case. You can also look up some of my articles on my Substack account, which I call Avigail Abarbanel's Fully Human Essays. I have written about personality disorders in some of my essays, and I explain my little pet theory about why people keep putting them in charge. The last two topics I want to talk about is how to avoid harm and what to do if you're already harmed. So how to avoid harm? I don't have all the answers, but one thing that comes to mind is trusting your intuition. And what I mean by that is if you are in some kind of a contact or start a relationship with somebody with a personality disorder, there are always warning signs. And if you have warning signs, do not ignore them. In 26 years of working with people who have been affected by people with personality disorders in personal relationships, I asked every single one of the victims, every single one of my clients who've been affected, were there warning signs in the beginning? And they all say yes. There were warning signs right from the start, weird behaviors, stuff that didn't quite make sense. And when I asked people what stopped you from listening to your warning signs, they said, because I didn't believe myself, or because I didn't want to be judgmental, or because I thought, oh, maybe that's reasonable. I didn't want to be too harsh. Or in some cases, because people were, they really wanted to have sex, or they wanted to have children, or they wanted to get married, or they were driven by some other survival instinct that overrode their own intuition. Remember, intuition, this gives us access to intuition too. So the limbic brain overrode them, despite the fact the limbic brain itself sensed something wrong and reported it. It also overrode itself because it was more in charge. So how to avoid harm is you've got to be really, really well integrated. The more integrated you are, the chances are you will listen to your warning signs. If you notice something is wrong and you have some red flags, you will walk away from it. You will not engage with somebody who has a personality disorder. Another thing too is boundaries. So it's kind of given that when you have better integration, you also have good boundaries. Boundaries are the real antidote for people with personality disorders. They can't stand them. They consider boundaries to be offensive and scary. It's like basically you're keeping the prey, or you're keeping the food away from them, or the supply away from them, because you have boundaries. They don't like that. So boundaries mean that somebody with a personality disorder is going to take one look at you and walk away. They're not going to try and use you as a supplier. So it's boundaries and it's integration. There are some situations where it's not your choice. You're going into the workplace and somebody has a personality disorder, and you kind of have to work with them. What do you do? So this comes to the next topic, which is what do you do if you're already harmed? So you are in a relationship with somebody like that, or you're working with somebody like that, and you're being harmed. The first thing to do is do not allow yourself to be isolated. Predators like to isolate their prey. If the prey has help, the prey is not going to be available, or the friends of the prey will come and stop. I mean, you must have seen, I don't know if you have, but I sometimes see how a bunch of crows get together to deter a bird of prey from attacking the young, or stealing the eggs of, or hurting the eggs of crows in their nests. So a whole bunch of crows, who are not birds of prey in the same way as an eagle or a kite, will go and attack that bird and push it away, so that it doesn't attack their young. So a predator can be deterred if their proposed prey has protection. So that also brings me to that point about, well, how does that work? It's, if you do fall prey to somebody like that, it's actually never your fault. People become prey to people with personality disorders simply because they're available and unprotected. That's why we need to protect vulnerable groups in society, and any group that's singled out, immigrants, or people of this color or that culture or that religion, suddenly being singled out in society, they become vulnerable to predators, because they're suddenly not valued, they're not protected, and if somebody preys on them, there is no protection for them. So predators do a risk assessment, and if they see that a potential prey is protected, they move away and they'll go and look for somebody else. That's why children have to be protected. If children report something is off with a teacher, with a relative, with a neighbor, with somebody, people need to listen to that and act on it. Children don't make stuff up like that. So it's nobody's fault if they become prey. But once you do, you have to make a huge fuss. Do not stay quiet. Do not allow a predator to silence you or to isolate you. Immediately report that. Immediately get some support from people around you and make a huge fuss. And that's how you can stop yourself from being harmed. Yes, the predator might try to fight you, and there's been nasty cases in the workplace, but there's also a lot of organizations out there that can help and that can understand that. I think I'd better stop here. As I said, this is a complicated topic. This is a very big topic. I know I have not covered everything, not even remotely, but I am working on a book, a short book in the series of books that I've already published on personality disorders, where I will speak in more detail about the things that I talked about in this podcast. I very much hope that you find this helpful. If you have any questions or any or any comments, please write to me to podcasts@fullyhuman.co.uk. Let me try and just show you um, the the email again. I want to make sure you have the email address. There we go. Let me show it to you. I'm sorry, I'm a bit clunky just now, but I should have had it open on the screen, but I forgot to do that. So this is the podcasts@fullyhuman.co.uk. If you write to me to this email, then your comment can stay private. If you want to comment on any of the platforms where I upload my podcasts, then people can see them. But if you want to give me a private email, that's podcast@fullyhuman.co.uk. As I explained, I'm really sorry, but I won't be able to answer every email because I'm actually very busy, but I will do my best. If it's really urgent, I will. I'll try anyway. Either way, I will use the comments and the questions that people send me to this email as a topic of podcasts. I want to also mention, if you are already in an abusive situation, if you have been a victim of sexual abuse or other abuse, a victim of rape, a victim of coercive control or domestic abuse, please do not be isolated. It isn't your fault. You need to go and get help. In the UK, we have, for example, Women's Aid. We have RASASH for rape and sexual abuse. We have different organizations that can help. And they do tend to understand. Seek police advice as well. The police are also pretty trained. They know. They've got profilers to help them understand. These podcasts go all over the world, so I can't tell you what's available in your country, but please do look it up. Do not allow yourself to continue to suffer unnecessarily from if somebody's abusing you in your relationship or in the workplace. If you're also responsible for children, remember that the children depend on you. They don't have anybody else. If you're the parent or significant adult in the children's lives, they have no protection against somebody with a personality disorder. In families, I find that the parent who doesn't have the personality disorder can be a little bit ineffective as a parent, because all they're doing is trying to regulate or manage the person with a personality disorder who demands all of their attention, which means that the children are neglected and the children are expected to just fall into line and collude with the healthy parent to manage the disordered parent. This is incredibly harmful. So I'm asking everyone, please learn about it, please understand it. If you think your husband or wife has a personality disorder, your partner has a personality disorder, and you have children with them, your children should be your priority, not the person with a personality disorder. Children have nobody else except adults to look after them. They are powerless as victims. So I'll end here. As I said, any questions, email me to podcast@fullyhuman.co.uk. I really hope that you're safe and healthy, and please do put the work of integration into practice. And I'll hopefully see you in the next podcast. Thank you very much.